Capitalism has driven unprecedented progress, but faces critical challenges in the 21st century. Today, we'll explore how to reimagine this powerful system for a sustainable future. Integrating principles of social justice and environmental responsibility, we'll delve into innovative approaches that can create a truly prosperous and equitable global economy. Stay tuned and stay safe.
So we've been digging deep into some seriously thought-provoking stuff lately, all about the future of capitalism and how we can make it truly sustainable. I mean, we've got a mountain of research here, articles, reports, case studies, you name it. Are you ready to extract the most insightful nuggets with me?
Let's do it. Reimagining capitalism is a big topic, but it feels increasingly urgent, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. One stat that really grabbed my attention, get this, by 2030, we're looking at a 30 million ton gap between the amount of plastic we recycle and the actual demand for recycled plastic.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's like picturing a Mount Everest made of plastic bottles just gone.
It's a striking image, and it points to a bigger problem with how our current capitalist models operate. We're incredibly efficient at production and consumption, but the system struggles when it comes to closing the loop and considering the long-term environmental and social costs.
Right. The sources really hammer home this short-term thinking. For example, fossil fuel stocks are still outperforming clean energy investments. Despite all the warnings about the climate crisis, it's like, are we ignoring a giant red flag here?
It's a disconnect between stated goals and actions. And it's not just investors. Despite all the pledges, we're seeing major financial institutions like JP Morgan and Bank of America backing out of initiatives like the Net Zero Banking Alliance. It raises some serious questions about the sincerity of those commitments.
So capitalism has a sustainability problem. Not exactly a hot take, but these sources lay it out in stark detail. But here's where it gets interesting. They don't just dwell on the doom and gloom, they explore solutions. One that pops up a lot is the need to integrate sustainability and inclusivity into the very fabric of our economic systems.
It's a move away from sustainability as an afterthought or a CSR initiative, to it being core to how businesses operate. Companies can't just mitigate harm. They need to actively create positive impact.
Like Patagonia, they've built their brand around environmentalism, using recycled materials, supporting environmental causes, and advocating for policy changes. Do you think that model, that commitment to values, is something that larger corporations can realistically replicate?
It's certainly a challenge, but we're seeing some encouraging examples. Unilever, a multinational giant, has made some strides with their sustainable living plan. They're tackling sustainable palm oil sourcing, carbon footprint reduction, and a whole range of issues across their supply chain. It suggests that change is possible, even at scale.
It's definitely a hopeful sign. And these sources point to a shift beyond individual companies doing good. We're seeing the rise of things like B corporations, which are legally required to consider their impact on all stakeholders.
The B Corp certification is rigorous. They have to meet high standards of social environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. It's not just a marketing ploy, it's a real commitment to doing business differently.
And then there's ESG investing, where environmental, social, and governance factors are considered alongside financial returns.
ESG is an interesting one. It's essentially pushing investors to think beyond just profits and consider a company's impact on the planet and society. It forces companies to think long-term, to integrate those considerations into their strategies, and to be transparent about their practices.
All of this feels particularly relevant when we consider Southeast Asia, which is prominently featured in a lot of these sources. It's a region facing some intense challenges: rapid growth, vulnerability to climate change, and deep social inequities.
Absolutely. And these challenges are all interconnected. Think about the impact of climate change on a region so reliant on agriculture and coastal communities. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, these are real threats to livelihoods and economic stability.
And then there's the issue of social inequity. Many Southeast Asian economies rely heavily on informal labor, which lacks the social safety nets and protections of formal employment. This makes them incredibly vulnerable to economic shocks.
It's a complex situation, and this is where reimagining capitalism becomes less of an abstract idea and more about economic survival and social stability for millions of people.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty stark picture of the problems. But what about the solutions? It feels like there's a lot of potential for innovation, especially in a region as dynamic as Southeast Asia.
You're right. And the sources highlight a wide spectrum of solutions, from grassroots innovations to large-scale initiatives.
For example, there's Husk Power Systems. They're bringing solar mini-grids to rural communities in India and Nigeria, providing affordable and clean energy to people who have never had access to electricity.
It's a fantastic example of how a reimagined capitalism can address multiple challenges at once. You're creating economic opportunities, improving lives, and tackling climate change simultaneously.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like China's state-driven EV revolution, which has drastically reduced EV costs globally.
China's approach is a powerful example of how government intervention can drive innovation and market transformation. It's a different model, one that raises questions about the role of the state in shaping a sustainable future.
Speaking of questions, these sources don't shy away from the tricky ones. There's a lot of discussion about greenwashing. How do we ensure companies are genuinely committed to sustainability, not just using it as a marketing tactic?
Greenwashing is a real concern. There's a lot of talk, but how do we measure actual impact? And how do we hold companies accountable? These are issues that consumers, investors, and regulators are grappling with. And then there's the question of green growth. Can we really decouple economic growth from environmental impact? Or is that just wishful thinking?
It feels like we're being asked to rethink some fundamental assumptions about how our economies work.
Exactly. And it's not just about tweaking the existing system. It's about fundamentally reimagining our relationship with the planet and with each other.
And that brings up another key point from the sources, the equity piece. A reimagined capitalism can't just be about profits and sustainability. It has to be inclusive and just.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We can't create a sustainable future if it only benefits a select few. We need to ensure that everyone has access to the opportunities and resources they need to thrive. So how do we measure progress toward a more just and equitable economy? GDP, the traditional yardstick of economic success, doesn't seem to capture the full picture.
It's a valid point. GDP doesn't account for things like environmental degradation, income inequality, or the value of unpaid work. We need alternative metrics that reflect a broader definition of well-being.
The sources mention the Genuine Progress Indicator, or GPI, which factors in those things. Using a metric like that would really shake things up, wouldn't it? Suddenly, a country with high GDP growth might not look so successful if it comes at the cost of environmental damage or social inequality.
It would certainly force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our current economic model.
But amidst these big, complex issues, there's some really inspiring examples of innovative solutions emerging.
Absolutely. For instance, there's Safi Organics, a Kenyan social enterprise that produces carbon-negative fertilizer from agricultural waste. They're not only helping farmers increase yields, they're actually pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's amazing. Turning waste into a resource that benefits both farmers and the planet. It reminds me of another example we saw, Husk Power Systems. They're providing solar mini-grids to rural communities that have never had access to electricity, replacing dangerous and polluting kerosene lamps.
These are brilliant examples of how a reimagined capitalism can create a win-win-win scenario. You're addressing energy poverty, empowering communities, and promoting sustainability all at the same time.
And technology seems to be playing a huge role in a lot of these solutions. We're seeing AI being used to optimize everything from energy grids to supply chains, blockchain for transparent and ethical sourcing, and all sorts of advancements in renewable energy technologies.
The potential of technology is undeniable, but these sources also caution against viewing technology as a silver bullet. There are real concerns about unintended consequences, such as job displacement and the potential for exacerbating existing inequalities.
So we can't just blindly embrace technology without considering the potential downsides. What are some of the pitfalls we should be aware of?
One concern is the potential for bias in AI algorithms, especially when it comes to things like lending or hiring decisions. There's also the issue of data privacy and the potential for misuse of personal information. And let's not forget the environmental impact of technology itself. The production and use of digital devices require significant energy and resources.
It's crucial to approach technology with a critical eye, ensuring that it serves humanity and the planet, not the other way around.
Precisely. We need robust regulations and ethical frameworks to guide the development and deployment of these powerful technologies.
The EU's AI Act, which aims to regulate the use of AI to mitigate ethical risks, is a step in the right direction, wouldn't you say?
It's an encouraging sign. However, there's a lot of debate about whether regulations are keeping pace with the rapid advancements in technology. And then there's the issue of enforcement.
It feels like there's a tension between promoting innovation and mitigating risk. How do we strike that balance?
It's a delicate dance, but one thing is clear. We need open and honest conversations about the potential impacts of technology, both positive and negative. And we need to involve a diverse range of voices in these discussions, not just technologists and policymakers, but also ethicists, social scientists, and communities who will be most affected by these technologies.
It's about making sure technology serves humanity, not the other way around. And speaking of human behavior, there's this concept of green hushing that I found both fascinating and a little concerning. It's where companies are downplaying their sustainability efforts because they fear backlash from consumers or politicians.
Green hushing highlights the complexities of this transition to a more sustainable future. It suggests that we haven't yet reached a point where sustainability is universally embraced. There are still strong forces pushing back against change, whether due to economic interests, political ideologies, or simply inertia.
It's a reminder that changing systems and behaviors is never easy. It requires not just innovation and technological advancements, but also a shift in mindsets and cultural norms.
Absolutely. We're talking about a profound transformation, one that challenges deeply ingrained assumptions about progress, prosperity, and our place in the world.
Okay, so we've got these incredible solutions emerging, but we're also facing pushback and resistance. It feels like we're at a crossroads, where the choices we make today will have a huge impact on the future.
It's a pivotal moment, and in the midst of all these technological advancements and economic models, we can't lose sight of the human element.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that ultimately change happens through individual actions and collective will. It's about consumers demanding sustainable products, investors supporting responsible businesses, citizens holding their governments accountable, and each of us making choices in our daily lives that align with our values.
It's empowering to think that we're not just passive bystanders in this process. We all have a role to play in shaping a better future.
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so compelling. It's not just about abstract theories or distant policy decisions. It's about the choices we make every day, the values we prioritize, and the future we want to create.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the key debates and questions that we need to be grappling with as we navigate this uncharted territory?
One of the biggest debates is about the role of government versus the free market.
Some people believe that market forces, driven by consumer demand and ethical investing, will be enough to steer corporations toward sustainability.
While others argue that we need stronger government intervention, like regulations with real teeth to force companies to change their behavior.
It's the classic debate. Do we trust businesses to do the right thing, or do we need to regulate them?
It's a complex issue, and the answer likely lies somewhere in between those two extremes.
The sources seem to suggest that we need a more nuanced approach.
Exactly. There are those who advocate for a collaborative model, where governments set the framework and incentives, but businesses have the flexibility to innovate and find solutions that work for them.
So finding the right balance between regulation and innovation is key.
Precisely. And that balance will likely vary depending on the specific challenge. For instance, with climate change, there's growing support for a global carbon price. But the details of how that price is set and who benefits from the revenue are hotly debated.
It makes sense that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
And let's not forget the role of individual action. Amid these large-scale systemic changes, it's easy to feel like our individual choices don't matter, but these sources argue that they absolutely do.
That's reassuring to hear, because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of these global challenges.
Consumer demand ultimately drives markets. If people are willing to pay a premium for sustainable products and support responsible businesses, it sends a powerful signal. And it's not just about purchasing power, it's also about using our voices, advocating for policies that support a more sustainable and equitable future.
We're not just consumers, we're citizens, investors, and members of communities. We have the power to influence change at multiple levels.
Exactly. These corporations and governments are made up of individuals who are also grappling with these questions, trying to figure out how to create a better future.
It's a good reminder that we're all in this together. And speaking of together, one thing that really struck me in these sources is the emphasis on collaboration, both regionally and globally.
You're right. We can't solve these complex challenges in isolation. It requires unprecedented levels of cooperation across borders and sectors.
The sources highlight some encouraging examples, like the Asian Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution, where countries are coming together to tackle a shared environmental challenge.
There are also numerous initiatives focused on greening supply chains, promoting sustainable trade practices, and sharing knowledge and resources.
It gives me hope that we're starting to recognize the interconnectedness of these issues
Yeah.
and the need for collective action.
Absolutely. And while the challenges are immense, the sources also highlight the incredible surge in innovation, collaboration, and willingness to question the status quo.
It's a reminder that the future isn't predetermined. We have the agency to shape it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so crucial. It's not just about understanding the problems, but also about exploring the solutions and empowering individuals to take action.
So for our listener,
Yeah.
who's just completed this deep dive into reimagining capitalism, what's the key takeaway?
The future of capitalism is being written right now. And it's not being written by some distant corporation or government. It's being written by each of us. Through the choices we make, the actions we take, and the conversations we have.
So the question we leave you with is this. What kind of capitalism do WE want to see? And what role will you play in shaping it?